Hi, guys. I'm so sorry I had to miss you today, but I'm excited that we can still learn our last new day of notes together. Don't forget, next week we're going to review for our test. So we'll go over the quiz that we took on Wednesday, and pretty much everything from the test will be on the quiz that we took on Wednesday, except for this one new lesson. So that's what we'll be studying for next week. And then your test is going to be given over 2 days. So part of your test will be given next Wednesday virtually. But then there's also a part where you have to hand draw graphs. And so that will be given next week before we leave on winter break. So make sure that you're studying and catching up on your homework. Let's refresh our memories a little bit about what we learned earlier this week because today's lesson is actually like a follow up of what we were learning earlier. So, earlier this week, we were trying to write an equation in slope-intercept form. Slope-intercept form is y equals mx plus b. But we didn't start in slope-intercept form. This is what our final answer looked like, but this is not what we started with. We started with our slope formula. So here's a reminder of what the slope formula looks like. You do want to memorize these two formulas because they are the two formulas that we'll be using for our test next week. So earlier this week, we started with our slope formula. And in the problems, we were given a slope and an ordered pair. And so then we plugged it into our slope formula. So the m went after the equal sign. And then the first number from the ordered pair went on the bottom of the fraction after the subtraction sign. And then the second number from the ordered pair went on the top of the fraction after the subtraction sign. Notice how I've color coordinated everything to help you keep track, right? So X is in blue, Y is in red, slope is in green. So just make sure that you're putting everything where it belongs. And then once we had everything plugged in, then it was 4 steps till we got to our final answer. So step 1 was cross multiplying. Step 2 was to distribute into the subtraction problems. Step 3 was to take any number that was being added or subtracted with your letter Y and move it to the other side so that it's with the letter X. Because remember, our goal was to get the letter Y all by itself. And then our last step, and sometimes we don't have to do this, but if there's a number in front of the letter Y, then our last step is to divide in 3 places, divide the Y and the X and the constant all by the number that was in front of the Y. And after you've done those 4 steps, you should end up with slope-intercept form, Y equals mx plus b. So remember, that's our ultimate goal, is to get Y equals mx plus b. If you didn't have a chance to write all of this down, make sure to ask for the video to be paused so that you have an opportunity to write down our notes. You should be taking notes today. Now, in today's lesson, we're going to be doing all the same things that we did earlier this week. So same stuff, same steps. So if you understood the lesson from earlier this week, that's fantastic. But there's going to be one thing that's different. I'm not going to give you the slope today. Instead, I'm going to give you 2 ordered pairs. So I will still give you an x1 and a y1, but you're also going to get an x2 and a y2. And since I didn't give you the slope, you can't put the numbers in here because we don't know what m is. So today I'm going to add a pre-step. We're going to call it step 1 because it's the first thing you're going to do. But we're going to add a pre-step of taking your 2 ordered pairs and finding the slope. Using the slope formula. I mean, that's why it's there. So that's the one thing that's going to be different today. You're going to have to do a little bit of calculating for step 1 before you do what we learned earlier this week. All right, so I have 2 examples to show you today. And again, make sure that you're copying down the examples. If you have colors, right, use your colors today to color coordinate which numbers go where. And make sure that, if you are struggling or falling behind, that you ask for the video to be paused for a little bit so that you have an opportunity to write things down or to ask questions if there's something that you're not understanding. Here is our first example. So the directions are the same from earlier this week. I want you to write an equation in slope-intercept form that passes through the points. And then here's where it's a little bit different because I didn't give you the slope. Instead, I gave you the two ordered pairs. So in this problem, my ordered pairs are -3, 3 and 1, 2. So we're going to start with our step one, which is we need to find the slope using the slope formula. So here's the slope formula again for you. And I find it helpful to label my ordered pairs. So remember that an ordered pair is always in alphabetical order. The X is first and the Y is second. And then since this is the first ordered pair in the problem, I put that this is the first X and the first Y, so X1, Y1. And then since this is the second ordered pair, I put that this was the second X and the second Y, so X2, Y2. And then remember, we're just taking the numbers and we're plugging them in where they belong. So, we start on top of the fraction with the y2, which is this number 2 right here. And it's always subtracting. And then after that, we put the y1, which is this 3 right here. So I know it gets a little bit confusing because we're using the second numbers from the ordered pairs first, but that's how slope works. And then underneath the fraction bar, we'll take our x2, which is this number 1 right here, and we'll subtract our x1, which is this -3. Now notice that I did put a double negative down here. I have my subtraction sign from the problem, and I have my negative sign because it was a -3. So make sure that you write both of those. And we learned earlier this week that when you have those two negative signs right next to each other, so minus negative, that you can change that to an adding problem. So I am going to change the bottom of the fraction into 1 plus 3. Now we do a little bit of math, right? 2 minus 3 is -1, and 1 plus 3 is 4. And that is my slope. And so that concludes the first half of this problem. Now we're not done. We just completed the first half. When you're ready, let's start the second half. So in step 2, I'm going to be using the slope formula. I'm going to change it a teeny tiny bit, but I'm going to be using the slope formula, and I'm going to be using two pieces of information from earlier in this problem. So here's my modified slope formula. What I've done basically is I've taken out the 2's underneath the y and the x, right? So it's just a y and just an x. And I even wrote them with the black marker because that way you will know we're not plugging numbers in there. So the y and the x at the beginning of the fraction are going to stay letters. The things that are going to be replaced with numbers are the things that are in color, right? So I'm going to do my x1 and my y1. That's from this ordered pair that we've already used earlier today, right? And I'm going to use my slope, my m, and that's what I had to calculate in step 1. So this ordered pair and this slope, those are the two things we're going to use for step 2. And we're not going to use this ordered pair anymore. In fact, if we want to, we can cross it off so that we don't accidentally use it. Okay? All right, so now we're getting into what we learned earlier this week. So this should start looking familiar because we have already done problems like this. So again, I'm going to do y minus, and then my y1 is 3. And I'm going to do x minus -3. But we talked about this earlier. Minus -3 is going to turn into +3. So I'm going to do that straight away. X plus 3, okay? And then we are going to set it equal to my slope. Now, just as a reminder, your slope should always be written as a fraction because to do our cross multiplying, you need a fraction equals a fraction. Also, if your slope is negative, we've been practicing always attaching the negative sign to the top number. So you can even see it up here, right? I kept my negative sign on top with my number 1, and then my number 4 on the bottom was positive. So make sure if your slope is negative that you only put the negative sign with the top number. Don't put it in front of the fraction. That gets confusing. Okay, so put it with that top number. From here, we are going to cross multiply. When you're cross multiplying, remember that we're following the arrows. So this number 4 is going to follow the arrow up, and it's going to be written next to the y minus 3. And the y minus 3 gets put into parentheses because it's a subtracting problem. And then the x plus 3, that also gets put in parentheses because it's adding, and it's going to travel up this arrow, and it's going to go next to that -1. And so my new problem looks like this. So again, my 4 traveled up the arrow, and it's next to the y minus 3, and then my x plus 3 traveled up the arrow, and it's next to my -1. Next, we're going to distribute. So I'm going to do 4 times y and 4 times -3. And then on this side, it's -1 times x. And then don't forget, -1 times plus 3 will make a -3, a -3. Okay, so be careful with your signs here. My next step is to take the number that's being added or subtracted with the letter y, so this -12, and I'm going to move it to the other side, moving it away from the y and closer to the x. So since it's a -12, I'm going to +12. And I'm going to line it up with its like term over here. So I'm going to add the 12 with the -3. And -3 plus 12 is 9. Now, in this problem, the letter y does have a number in front of it. There's a 4 in front of it. So we will need to do that very last step, which is dividing in 3 different places by the number in front of the y. So the places that you're going to divide the y by the 4. You're going to divide the x by the 4, and you're going to divide the 9 by the 4. And the 4s with the y will cancel. That was kind of the whole point of why we were doing this. And then it's okay that these other two, like they don't divide nicely, right? So in front of the x, we're going to get a fraction -1/4. And that's exactly what we wanted to get, because if you look back up here, my slope was -1/4. So that's really good that we have a fraction -1/4 in front of the x. And then 9 is not divisible by 4, but like, so what? Just write it 9/4. So you can just like leave it exactly the same as how it looks when you're doing the dividing. And just make sure to cancel out the number in front of the y so that the y is all by itself. And this is our final answer. So sometimes our answers are going to have fractions in them. It's just the way it is. And that's okay. Actually, it's like less work for you guys because you don't have to actually divide. You're just going to leave it how it looks. All right, let's do one more together before you guys start your homework. So same directions, write an equation in slope intercept form that passes through the points 2, -1, and 5, 8. So new ordered pairs, but same concept. All right, so let's start with step 1. And step 1 is finding our slope. If it helps, right, label your ordered pairs or use your colors, right? So Y's are red and X's are blue. And make sure you put your Y's on the top and your X's on the bottom. In this problem, I'm going to, on top of my fraction, I'm going to do 8 minus -1, and I will write that double negative, and then 5 minus 2. Notice when in the fraction that, the 8 and the 5 at the beginning of the fraction, those both came from the same ordered pair. And that should always be the case. And the -1 and the 2 at the end, those also both came from the same ordered pair. So you want to make sure that, the beginning numbers came together, grouped together, and then the end numbers came grouped together. Because I do have a minus negative in this example as well, I will be changing the top to a plus instead of a minus. That does not always happen. It only happened in these problems because the number after the minus sign was negative. So that doesn't happen in every question. It just happened to happen in our 2 examples. All right, 8 plus 1 is 9. 5 minus 2 is 3. And if your slope can simplify, you do want to simplify it some more. So for this slope, 9 and 3, those are both divisible by 3. So I am going to go ahead and divide them by 3. But I'm going to leave it a fraction. So I'm going to leave it the fraction 3 over 1. So you don't want to change it to a whole number. It is in your best interest to leave your slope written as a fraction. This is the end of the first step. So now we'll do the second step. For the second step, we're going to use a modified slope formula and two pieces of information from our first step. So remember our modified slope formula, the y and the x at the beginning are going to stay the letter y and x. We're going to use the first ordered pair, but not the second one. And we're going to use our answer from step 1, the slope. So in this problem, for step 2, I am going to have y minus -1, which will change to y plus 1, x minus 2, and it's going to equal 3 over 1. And again, you have to keep it a fraction because to cross multiply, we need a fraction equals a fraction. So if you write it as a whole number, you won't be able to cross multiply and it's going to get really confusing. So just always practice writing your slope as a fraction. Next, we will cross multiply. Remember, when you're cross multiplying, the 1 is going to travel up the arrow, and it's going to be written next to the y plus 1, which goes in parentheses because it's like an adding problem, right? And then, just change color, the x minus 2 goes in parentheses, and it's going to travel up the arrow, and it's going to go right next to that number 3. Okay, so this is what it looks like after you've cross multiplied. Our next step is distributing. So I'm going to distribute the 1 times the y and the 1 times the 1, and then the 3 times the x and the 3 times the minus 2. And I get this. And now in this problem, there's no number in front of my letter y. So I just need to do one more step and then I'm done. So if there's not a number in front of the y, you don't have to do that last step of dividing. You can do the subtracting. So I'm going to -1 and -1, and -6 and -1 makes -7. And then we're done because the y is all by itself. And that's kind of our whole goal on these problems, right? We want to get the letter y all alone, and our final answer needs to look like this. Right? Y equals mx plus b. And this does. So this concludes our notes for today. I'm going to leave up this slide. So, while you're working on your homework, you can look at this slide to see what the directions are and how to do the problems. And you can also, look at your examples in your notes while you're working on the homework. Today's homework is writing slope-intercept form day 2. Day 2. And I've set it up so it's exactly like the notes, right? So there's a space for a step 1, there's even a line, and then a space for the step 2. So make sure you're doing everything just like we were doing in the notes. If you finish today's homework before the end of class, there are other homeworks you can work on. So you can work on your homework from earlier this week, which was writing slope-intercept form day 1. If you don't have that worksheet with you, there's more available by the door. Writing slope-intercept form day 1 is just the steps 1 through 4 that you can see on this screen. So it's get rid of this step 1 and just do these things, right? That's what we learned earlier this week. So you can work on that worksheet if you finish tonight's homework. And also don't forget, you have 3 homework assignments really that are kind of ongoing that you need to have done before we take our test next Thursday or Friday, right? So one of them is the picture graph that you got before Thanksgiving. So you still have time to turn that in, but you need to be, constantly working on it. Remember, it could be a turkey or a pilgrim hat or the Mayflower. And then the other 2 assignments is we've had 2 weeks of Delta Math. So last week it was Delta Math week 9, and that's all about this slope formula up here. And then Wednesday, I did assign a new Delta Math, which was week 10, and that was all about graphs and actually these 4 steps that you can see on the board right now. So make sure that you are catching up on all of your homework. It all has to be turned in before winter break. So use this time wisely.